opportunity to introduce our moderator, substitute moderator. Our moderator was Yassine from Egypt. Unfortunately, she won't be able to join this call due to unforeseen circumstances. Emmanuel Kayongo is going to moderate this session. Emmanuel Kayongo has 15 years of hands-on experience in management, commitment systems, strategic communication, social behavior change, marketing, research, monitoring and evaluation, quality improvement, knowledge management, health management, information systems, and administration in areas of HIV/AIDS, global health security, including COVID-19, malaria, family planning, reproductive health, tuberculosis, nutrition, WASH, maternal and child health, and gender and youth programming. Emmanuel Kayongo, just before 20th of January, Emmanuel Kayongo was the senior technical advisor with Johns Hopkins Center for Communication Programs on a project called USAID Social and Behavior Change Activity in Uganda. Previously, he had worked with URC and also FHI 360 and Maristops, Grammy Foundation, Johns Hopkins as well. Emmanuel Kayongo currently serves as the General Secretary for the Global Alliance for Social and Behavior Change. He also holds a master's in public health, a bachelor's in mass communication, and other postgraduate trainings. He's sociable, people-centered, result-oriented professional with excellent communication and writing skills. Emmanuel Kayongo, you're welcome to take care of this session, and thank you for accepting at very short notice to substitute as a moderator for this session. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kenneth, and welcome everyone from Africa and beyond. I'd like to start by thanking Professor Adebayo for setting the stage effectively, as he has highlighted financial sustainability being essential for the success and impact of SBC programming. As Kenneth mentioned, I'll take the enviable task of quickly stepping in to moderate today's session. Unlike other sessions where we normally lead with a presentation, today's session will be a panel-led discussion that will be composed of questions to the panelists. We have 5 panelists. I'll start by introducing Dr. Olusoji Adeyen, I hope I got the pronunciation right, who is a social and human capital development expert with over 32 years of industry experience and career spanning over 20 years in the United Nations system. He has worked locally and internationally, serving in 5 countries across 3 continents, but also took early retirement in 2015 as the chairman of the United Nations Joint Staff Pensions Fund. As a consultant, he has supported the Federal Ministry of Education in Nigeria on the World Bank-funded Global Partnership for Education project. He was until recently the regional consultant on the human capital development for the states in the south to south region, and the Human Capital Development Core Working Group of the National Economic Council in Nigeria. He currently serves as the National Consultant and Education Advisor for Education Outcomes Fund operating in Ghana, Sierra Leone, and Rwanda. Join me in welcoming Dr. Olusoji. Another of our panelists is Lenan Labik, who is a development communication practitioner in Ghana with 7 years of experience in developing and implementing communication strategies to foster development. Her specialties include social and behavior change communication, health communication, community engagement, constituency building, and strengthening research, among others. She works with multiple and diverse stakeholders to develop and implement SBC strategies, to reduce illegal fishing, gender-based violence, child labor, trafficking, as well as adaptation of supplemental livelihood. Social works are in ensuring accountability, strengthening the media to hold duty bearers accountable, and supporting key constituents to advocate for sustainable development. With the work that she does, she engages stakeholders at various levels. She holds a bachelor's degree in development studies from the University of Development Studies, a master's degree in development communication from the UNAMAC G University, a master's in public health from the Ghana Institute of Management and Public Administration, and a master's in international law from the University of Ghana. She's interested in issues of development, sustainable development, climate change, feminism, and public health. Please join me in welcoming Perfecto Lenani Lebik. The third panelist is Edgar Bayereza, a seasoned professional accountant with over 20 years of experience in audit, risk management, and financial management. Having started his career with PricewaterhouseCoopers in Kampala, Uganda, he has been privileged to work in diverse multicultural environments across 4 continents, being Africa, Asia, Europe, and Oceania, in both public and private sectors. Edgar is passionate about enhancing organizational effectiveness through improved governance and oversight mechanism. Edgar currently serves with the Gavi, the Vaccine Alliance in Geneva, Switzerland, as a senior manager, portfolio financial management. Is the author of a book, Dirty Cash, that draws on his experiences in fighting fraud in both private and public organizations. The next panelist is Mrs. Mona Muguma Sebuliba, who is the Chief Executive Officer for ABI Finance Limited, an organization whose mandate is to promote access to sustainable green finance for agro-businesses and smallholder farmers. She's a board member for both Stanbic Holdings Uganda Limited and SBG Securities Uganda, and the board chair of the Renewable Energy Business Incubator, and the founding member and treasurer for the Women's Leadership Development. She's passionate about promoting sustainable and green financing interventions, as well as women's rights, leadership, and development. Mona was first mentored by her mother, watching her work along other formidable women in their work with FIDA, where she strove to ensure that women's rights were secured and their leadership and involvement enhanced. She later got her own practical immersion into the work of field when she worked with Akina Mama wa Africa, where she served as a regional head of programs. Our last panelist is Asia Ahmed, who is a PhD holder and is a distinguished communications and advocacy expert with extensive experience in strategic communication, government relations and partnerships, with a strong background in digital marketing, public policy, and development communication. She has served in key leadership roles, including Director of the Advocacy, Government Relations Communications, and Partnerships at UNFPA Egypt, where she spearheaded the impactful campaigns and policy initiatives. Currently, she's the Director of Communications, Government Relations, and Partnership at Al-Wasan Holding for Financial Investments, and a lecturer at the German International University, specializing in digital marketing and consumer behavior. Asia is passionate about leveraging data-driven communication strategies to drive social change, corporate impact, and policy development. As you see, the lineup is quite big and heavy, but the whole point is that from them, we hope to draw expertise and draw insights into today's today's topic. For the panel discussion, we'll take about 15 minutes, spending about 7 to 8 minutes per personalist for each of the questions. And after the 15 minutes, we'll open up the space for questions or additions to what the panelists will have said. So I'll begin by asking Dr. Olusoji. So building on to the context that Professor Adebayo provided, what are the most pressing financial and operational risks affecting broader social development initiatives, particularly those outside the direct scope of SBC? And how do these risks differ from those faced by SBC-focused organizations? Dr. Olusoji. Dr. Olusoji?
Hello, please confirm you can hear me.
Yeah, we can, loud and clear.
Okay, I'm struggling with two devices, trying to see if I could turn on my video, but I am being prevented from doing so. So I'm wondering if
you can go ahead.
Can get help.
You can just go ahead. We can hear you.
But if you can hear me loud and clear.
Yeah, loud and clear.
Then it's fine. Okay, so thank you for having me, and thank you, Mr. Moderator. And I want to thank Professor Bayo Fayoyi for the that's good, for the opportunity to get onto this platform and make some comments. I want to assure the entire development community that indeed there is a transition in AIDS and development financing, whether we like it or not. This has been long coming because this conversation started over a decade ago as to how sustainable the current situation is, where, you know, the funding that is coming into the development space is perceived to be a bit beyond expectations of the funders, so to speak, because one of the reasons why USAID is throwing away the baby with the bathwater, as they would say in Africa, is perhaps the explanation that there are some challenges associated with the deployment of the funds and how such funds are being managed, you know, at implementation stage. We are all very familiar with the traditional, you know, funding system where we fund inputs and projects across various countries, such as health projects, education projects, water and sanitation projects. And of course, for those of us working around behavioral change communication, we also see a lot of programs in that space that are targeting human capital development and, you know, behavioral change in order to achieve its objectives. This input-based model is beginning to be outdated now because tracking their deliverology has been proven to be very difficult, and funders are looking for more creative ways to reduce risk and increase the possibility of achieving results. One of that is bringing in what the group that is called impact funders and the group that is called the outcome funders. The impact funders are not necessarily the traditional funding, you know, partners that we are used to, the World Bank, the, you know, bilateral agencies, FCDO, USAID, and the rest of them. No. Some of these impact funders are philanthropists. Some are, you know, hybrid firms. Some are even private sector funders, but they are interested in social investments, and they would like to put their money where their mouth is. So we're seeing more of them, as we engage. And we're seeing that they are more concerned about the way we implement our programs and projects across various sectors. For instance, in the education space, they are asking that we should be measuring outcomes rather than the input into our project. So we won't count the number of schools, we won't count the number of books that we provided to students, we won't count number of teachers that are trained, which are traditional, indicators that we are used to measuring. But instead of this, we will be looking at outcome, indicators that would show that children have passed through this whole process and they are now transiting from one level of education to another level of education, and the funders will be paying for that, achievement in education outcomes. So it does not matter what you put into the input, into the immediate output, but you are measuring the outcomes, which is where the real impact, lies. It's the same thing in water and sanitation. They are saying that we are not longer, in order to measure, to create an open defecation-free community, we will not be measuring the number of toilets that are provided in those communities, but rather we will be measuring the absence of cholera and waterborne diseases and all that in that community that is linked to those inputs and immediate outputs of building latrines and toilet facilities and providing water, potable water for such communities, even though those are inputs and they are good, but the ultimate objective is to see that those communities are not ravaged by cholera or ravaged by diseases that can be controlled using, the input. In the health outcomes, for instance, we won't be measuring number of hospitals, but we'll be measuring access, to traditional, to healthcare through the number of people that are using those facilities and that are enjoying, the facilities, as we speak. So the bottom line is that the indicators are changing because the funding mechanisms are changing. So if you're bringing in private sector funding, for instance, you're bringing in philanthropic funding, for instance, into the development space, which are the things we're going to be seeing going forward by the time the bilaterals and some, international agencies shut down on their systems. Perhaps they are going to come back in a new format, and the new format they're going to come back in most likely will include, those very innovative financing mechanisms like the outcome funding mechanism, like the impact funding mechanism. So I see a transition, and that we all must catch up with, learning how to redefine what our program objectives would be, what our measurable impact would be in any area in which we are going to be intervening. We are going to play less on the inputs. We're going to play less on the immediate results. We're going to be focusing more on results. And we are all, majority of us are familiar with pay for results in terms of, the World Bank initiative that has been on now for the last, decade. I believe that this is going to be fine-tuned and refined more to make sure that results are measurable at impact level and at outcome level, and that the funders are going to be demanding more accountability. They are going to be demanding more resilience in the ability of impact, in the ability of service providers, NGOs, civil society, governments, to be able to deliver results based largely on the outcomes that are predefined at the beginning of every project or programs that are being initiated at the country level. So the changes are there, whether we like it or not. We need to be ready for the new normal. The new normal is a situation where we are not going to get loads of funds, thrown at our account, and then, we start to implement activities by, creating inputs and immediate output and then reporting that as results. No, we're going to go through the entire, balance where we will ensure that whatever we do in education results in learning outcomes that make sure that children who actually went through such system are actually better off than those who did not go through the system. So there will be control, communities, there will be impact communities that they measure would begin to reflect precisely what the world would like to see going forward. Aid is dying, whether we like it or not. We are not likely to see what we have seen in the last 3 decades. We are going to see a new definition in development financing. And the more we as practitioners get familiar with the new funding mechanisms, the better for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you, Doctor. What I get from what you're saying, the word has been results, as well as innovative financing and more looking at impact rather than sort of the process things that we have sort of been used to. I think I would leave you for a moment and move on to Miss Labik. Who I wanted to ask, what do you see as the biggest challenges in securing funding, specifically for SBC initiatives, considering that often intangible and the long-term nature of behavior change outcomes compared to more easily quantifiable interventions? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I was hoping to put on my video, but I'm having some bandwidth challenges. Good afternoon to everyone from here from Ghana. Good morning, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Thank you for the question. And as social and behavior change practitioners or development practitioners all over the world, we do understand that social and behavior change is very necessary for addressing our complex social issues. It's been used a lot in the public health space. It's being used in education, and now we're seeing it being used in a lot of environmental issues, even climate change, marine conservation, and in fisheries, which is the space I currently work in. But in as much as we do understand the importance of implementing or leveraging social and behavior change strategies, we also do understand how much difficult it is to monitor and evaluate behaviors, because as Dr. Adeni said, we're not talking about building a hospital. We're not talking about building a school. We're talking about influencing people's knowledge, their attitude, their practices. We're trying to influence people to adopt different behaviors other than the ones that they are used to. And this, doing this on its own is very difficult. How much more trying to implement this? So it's very difficult. A donor or a funder is not just looking at the fact that you have trained let's say 10 people in, for example, using contraceptives, or you have distributed this number of contraceptives. Are people actually using it? How has it changed their lives? How is it actually resulting in something which usually is not tangible, where you can pinpoint to say, this is it. Look at it. This is it. It's green, it's red, it's black. It's difficult in our field, and that is why we need to look at strategies that focuses on other things that are much intentional, because social and behavior change takes a lot of time for you to see results. It needs a lot of intentionality, a lot of commitment. It needs all these things to actually be sustained over a long period of time, because we're dealing with human beings here. And even to start with, before you even start to implement your strategies that you have designed, you need to even understand why human beings, all the subjects are doing what they are doing, and then you now come to think of how to influence them to adopt desired behaviors. Hence, the intangible nature becomes the biggest obstacle in securing funding, because as we've mentioned, the donors are but usually they would see like short-term investments and they'll see something tangible. For example, in fisheries where I work, you are to influence behaviors of fishers to adopt sustainable fishing practices, whereas they've been doing unsustainable fishing for so many years, and it takes quite a lot. You are even challenging policy, you are challenging and how government does its thing to now come in to even work with the community members themselves. But notwithstanding the fact that we are confronted with all of this, I think that in attempting to answer your question, I will focus my response on the need for us to center communities and community members in the work that we do to actually show results. For example, how can we involve communities in partnerships? How can we leverage their existing structures, what works in the community to be able to actually communicate our results by positioning communities as co-investors, co-creators. We'll be able to beat the narrative that SBC initiatives are like externally driven, because most often in my experience or in my practice, most often you'd have people say that the outcomes that you want to achieve are externally driven, and that is what the donor wants. But when we are centering community members and communities in these initiatives, it can be seen, we will be able to position that these are also community initiatives and they are interested in it. We can do this from the design stage where we are letting communities lead. And once we let communities lead, we'll be able to see sustainability beyond investment, because that is exactly what the donors and the funders are looking at. In the development space, we say sustainability is a word that we use over and over again. So investors or donors are looking at sustainability beyond investment after the project is done, because usually the projects are like about 5 years, 4 years, and they want you to demonstrate to them after the project is done, what happens next? Does everything go away with the project? How are you showing that the communities would continue this? And sometimes we need to look at the community contributions. It doesn't, in some cases, I have seen communities bringing in money. But sometimes, most often, they can bring their time, they can bring their labor. I'll give you a typical example of something I worked on here in Ghana, where we trying to influence fishers to adopt sustainable fishing practices, also trying to influence them to let me say, stop gender-based violence and child labor and trafficking. And one of the ways we're trying to do, one of the measures we're trying to use was creative or visual storytelling, where we're trying to put up murals. And from the design stage, it was something that the communities themselves, through other engagements, had proposed that they had seen some of these things being done. And we decided to let the communities invest. When I say invest, we didn't do, when it comes to the community engagement, usually sometimes in community engagements, you know, you're giving money, sometimes you're giving transportation, you're giving them food, all of that. We decided to let them mobilize their own engagements. And then when it came to the selection of the space for the murals, they did the selection of the space themselves. And then they went ahead to prep the walls for the design. So back then, as in when we will come and, you know, we would say, okay, this is what we want to do. And then we would do everything from the onset, as in prep the wall, paint before we come and do the painting. This time around, the community's investment to show that this is something that we said we want, and this is something that we would ensure is sustainable, was that they would prepare the walls themselves. They came together, they contributed their own monies and saw to the murals being design. They were part of the design process. They're very creative people. So I was really impressed with the way how that went. And I would say that we had a lot of skeptics who were like, this will not work. But at the end of the day, it worked. And it's nice to mention that the murals are up and the communities themselves are actually even safeguarding the murals to show that it's not damaged by anybody. And I would say that we should continue to design with them, redesign with them, modify with them, and hopefully also looking beyond our traditional donors. And usually we're always talking about government buy-in. There was a USAID project here in Ghana that was able to get the government to buy into a tagline that good life live it. And now even with the Ghana Health Service, when you see all their campaigns, you will see that they have that tagline, good life live it. And it took a long while. It wasn't just overnight, but it took a long while. I would end with talking about, I'm a communications person, so I can't end without emphasizing how it is important for us to tell our stories. With the recent issues that are happening with funding, one of the things I keep telling people is we didn't tell our stories much. We didn't show people like the impact that we are making, the lives that we are touching. For behavior change, we know that using the traditional indicators, the traditional KPIs can sometimes be challenging, but using human-centered storytelling is a powerful tool that we need to keep leveraging. And in these stories, centering the communities in it, and also centering the fact that they are part of the design, they are part of the implementation, and they are part of the sustainability. So in as much as we are trying to adopt more rigorous measurements, which may be in line with our traditional M&E systems, monitoring, evaluation, and learning systems, it is also very imperative to tell our stories using human-centered approaches that go beyond what we usually know. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Perfectio. I think the issues that you speak to, community engagement, storytelling, have sort of been emerging priorities within the field. If you look at, for example, the previous global SBC conference, one of the key takeaways was for us to ensure that we're getting the storytelling question correct. And even from the recently held Africa SBC conference, storytelling and community engagement was a very strong sort of themes that that came out. Moving on to Edgar. Edgar wanted to first of all emphasize to the listeners and that Edgar is speaking in his individual capacity and not representing Gavi or any other place that he has worked for. So Edgar, in an increasingly competitive funding landscape, what key factors do you believe differentiate successful funding recipients from those that struggle to secure donor funding or partner support? Thank you.
Thank you so much, and thank you for the invitation to speak to you today. It's a great honor, and really look forward to our discussion at the end of this. I like the fact that Perfecto talked about storytelling. So I'll start with a story to answer the question. So, and this story is really for you to look at yourself as a product. We are working in a very crowded landscape, so many different organizations, so many different players, and at the same time, the funding landscape is shrinking. So how do you stand out? How do you make yourself the beautiful bride that everyone will come, to look at? So look at yourself, first of all, as a product. Long ago in my experience with the private sector, I had a client who was very aggressive with their sales, and every year they were hitting targets, more and more aggressive targets. And one day I asked them, what's the secret? What's the secret to your success? How do you continue to do this, seemingly hitting the impossible targets year on year? And they said that one thing they do is they look beyond the sector they are playing in. So what they look at when they're considering their competition, they are not just looking at the sector they are playing in. They are looking at the individual that they are targeting. And they're saying, this person we're looking at, what drives their lifestyle decisions and therefore their spending habits. So if this person has, say, $100 in their pocket, how are they going to allocate those $100? Where is that money going? And then they started to fight for space in that wallet. So appealing to lifestyle, appealing to the way they live their lives, appealing to, positioning their products, positioning their brand as a must-have for anyone's lifestyle, something to look up to. So how does this brief story translate for you? How does it translate for you? So one is to ensure that your priorities are aligned. Prof started off by telling us how priorities are changing. Donors are starting to look at different things. Perfectual also mentioned the fact that different things like climate change are coming to the fore. So different priorities are coming up. More and more we are seeing in our sector in public health that donors, partners are looking more and more to align with country priorities. So how do you establish yourself in that space? Who are the key players in your different sectors? If it's public health issues, so how do you align with the Ministry of Health? Your national strategy is what you're looking to do, helping to meet those objectives. And then also the shifting priorities. If education is becoming more and more of an issue, how are we aligning? What in education exactly are we looking to resolve? So making sure that your priorities are aligned. And also, don't underestimate your position in the field. You know exactly what's required. You're engaging with people at the grassroots, and there are nuances that the donors, the partners may miss. So if you have critical but unfunded or underfunded areas, how do you build advocacy for them? How do you raise an alarm? What are you doing to influence the different policy or decision makers? How are you fighting for space in their wallets, essentially? So, and I saw your association now, you have 15 country chapters. So that's a big voice, that's a loud voice. How can you leverage your network? How can you leverage your association to advocate for some of the critical things and turn the eyes of those that matter towards the things that you feel should be prioritized? But beyond alignment, and where I'll spend a bit of time, is the need for you to build trust. You need to build trust. You must be able to demonstrate credibility and in order to secure and retain funding. And how do we do this? By ensuring you have transparent systems, you are accountable, and you have impact. You have impact. The first two panelists mentioned a lot about the impact. Donors are shifting away from inputs. They want to see how exactly are you impacting the society? How exactly are you impacting the market or the space in which you're operating? So this is becoming more and more critical. And the other thing, considering the shifts we are seeing now with donors, the shifts we are seeing with what's currently happening the past few weeks, is trust is also critical to facilitate sustainability discussions. And sustainability, I'm looking at beyond the programs necessarily. I'm looking at sustainability of the organization. So these are conversations that people tend to shy away from, but I encourage you to have these conversations more openly, more frequently. For instance, open the room for discussions around building reserves or having unrestricted funds, because if you're able to build reserves, then when such situations come where priorities are shifting, at least in this period before the dust settles, you have something to tide you over. But unfortunately, many organizations have exactly what they need to implement. So if the contract ends, that's the end of the organization. But we need to be able to build reserves, either by diversifying our source of income, being able to have some profit-making arm, or talking to our partners and engaging them on the need for you to have that flexibility to build reserves. But for them to even come to the table for that conversation, you need to have trust. They need to have trust in your systems. They need to have trust that these extra funds will be used for the right thing. And the unfortunate thing about trust is that it takes so long to build, but can be lost overnight. It's a fragile commodity. So what are some of those things that you should look out for that can destroy or compromise this trust? So one is weak internal controls. We keep talking about internal controls, but think of strong internal controls as the key that gets you into the house. I've known many organizations with wonderful proposals, very good visions, but they are not able to get any funding because they have no sense of structure, they have no controls, no systems, nothing. And so there's no credibility. There's nothing for the partners to hold on to. So controls are something you need to look at, ensuring that your key functions are there. And one of the challenges for small organizations becomes affordability of expertise. For instance, if you want to have a professional accountant will cost a lot of money. If you want to have procurement expertise, you want to have internal audit, these things cost a lot of money, which may not be feasible for you in the short term, but you can have options to outsource. I've had clients in the past who couldn't afford full-time staff, but they would outsource, get professionals coming in on a quarterly basis or as often as you can afford it. So there are ways to do it as you grow to the size that you need to be, where you can afford these things. Closely linked to internal controls is oversight or governance mechanisms. You need to be able to demonstrate that you have some independent oversight over what you're doing. Who is checking? Who is validating? And again, the issue of affordability comes up, but one of the good things about your sector is that because it's dealing with real issues, you have a lot of passionate experts who would look kindly and who would be willing to support, who would be willing to volunteer their time. So seek out these volunteers who are happy to provide of their time and their expertise without necessarily getting compensation for it. And the other advantage with having these experts, it goes beyond just their expertise. It helps to build credibility depending on who is on your board. It helps also to provide access to their networks. So it has so many different advantages of having these people on board. The other point I'll make on this, on the trust issue, is something that's often underlooked. It's your performance targets. Your performance targets. In the bid to win awards, it's very easy for you to set unrealistic performance targets or inflated promises of impact. There's so much pressure now to prove impact. And so there can be that temptation to inflate what you can do in order to win the award. But the challenge now is once you win it, you have to do something about it. You have to live up to the words that you promised. And now you get stuck between two hard places. One, between not meeting the targets and therefore losing credibility, or forging results, which is a slippery slope. It's not sustainable in the long run. And when you start to do these things, then it opens up room also for other practices of wrongdoing and potential fraud as well. The other one that I touch on in my book that was mentioned in the introduction that many people ignore. When people talk about trust, when people talk about accountability, many people are looking outward, but we forget that our key stakeholders are our staff. And one of the big ways that we lose credibility, we lose trust, is through unfair human resource practices. How do we recruit? How do we manage performance? Do we have clear compensation policies? Is there a consistency or transparency in how, in our disciplinary measures? Is there protection from retaliation in case people want to speak out when things are going wrong? These are some of the areas which, if not addressed, will compromise the organization in the long run. One, you can start to have a lot of noise from disgruntled staff who shout, who go to the media, saying things. We had a recent case like that with one of my former clients, where disgruntled staff went to the media to complain because they felt there was no room internally to speak freely, to speak without retaliation. The other more damaging one in the long run is it's very difficult to retain good staff in a dysfunctional environment. You will always lose your best staff and remain with those that you would rather leave. So internal controls, oversight, your performance targets, your HR, those are 4 areas I would urge you to look very critically upon to maintain trust, because it's trust at the end of the day that gives us access to all these other things. Thank you. And the rest we shall answer based on the questions that you have.
Thank you, Edgar. It's strange that you talk about trust. Tomorrow is Valentine. It's strange that you started by speaking about the individual. And from what you say, the individual essentially, the organization is an individual. If you lose trust, then things tend to go south. I'd like to invite Mona. Mona, could you describe to us ABI financing, focusing particularly on its structure and operating model, and what has made it financially stable and sustainable? And also, if time allows, what aspects of ABI's finances model could be borrowed or replicated by actors in other sectors like social, like the fraternity listening to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for having me. Basically, ABI Finance is an impact and development finance organization that is 15 years old, based in Uganda, and focuses on deepening access to finance for smallholder farmers and agribusinesses. It was born out of project-type organizations that used to have 5-year cycles. So it was. It is an initiative by the Danish government, the Royal Danish government or embassy, or Danida, as many of you might know, who I think in many countries and jurisdictions run a couple of programs, and they tend to run them in 5-year project or cycles. But during, I think, the 4th cycle of 5-year programs prior to setting up ABI, the sponsors or the key players around the last program before ABI was born sat around a table really and talked about the need for sustainable, and by sustainable here, I'm talking about long-term sustainable interventions that were required to achieve what they wanted to do in the agribusiness or agriculture sector in Uganda. So they determined that the 5-year type project, you have a short 5-year continuum or timeline, after which you dismantle the program, sell off everything, then you start another one, recruit people, sometimes retain the same people, and then, after 5 years, do the same thing. They realized that some of the interventions that were required needed to happen in perpetuity or longer than the 5-year cycles. One, I'm thinking that from this fraternity could borrow some of those concepts or ideas that perhaps the short term is not what will work, and you need to think long term. I'll borrow from what Edgar talked about, or the previous speaker, Edgar, just said about trust. The founders or the people that sat at a table knew each other, and there were relationships in place. So that's one important aspect I must emphasize, that it wasn't in the last cycle or the last project that this was born. It was a long-term conversation, which materialized in 2010. So trust is an important thing. Relationships are an important thing because they're at the very core and the foundation of the formation of ABI. So come 2010, the governments of Uganda, just a strategic partner, and the Danish government decide to set up ABIs, initially as a trust, which became a bit difficult to run. And then we morphed into a company limited by guarantee. And thereafter, now we're a company limited by shares. But I want to just talk about the model or how that happened. So now the Danish government came up with an endowment fund, and they said, what we would have given, for instance, over the next 5, 10, 15 years in short-term projects, let's form this organization and provide an endowment fund, which formed the capital fund, or if you like, the seed capital for ABI Finance. And what ABI Finance then does or has done for the last 15 years is be a wholesale lender. That capital fund was then or is then invested in debt to financial institutions who then lend to smallholder farmers and agribusinesses. The idea being that they were going to borrow anyway, they needed financing. And one of the ways that the sector needed support was in making special or focused liquidity specifically for the agribusiness sector. When you look at how the banks, right from the tier 1 big banks to the tier 2s, the microfinance institutions, even the savings and credit cooperatives, when they are allocating the money that they have, the deposits and any other source of funding that they have to lend to sectors, agriculture is usually far way down below, around 6 or 7. Before that, they'd rather park their money in government bonds and treasury bills. They'd rather lend us for our personal loans, you and I. They'd rather lend it to the real estate sector. They'd rather lend it to the manufacturing sector. Many other sectors that are deemed less risky compared to agriculture. So we found that making funds available specifically for the agriculture sector was crucial. So that's where we came in. So we said, or ABI said, these funds that we're making available for banks to borrow from us can only be lent in the agribusiness sector to SMEs or to smallholder farmers. And that's a big thing for us because it has made us sustainable, because it's a commercial product. We're not retail. And in fact, in the Ugandan space, you find that the retail sector doesn't know about ABI Finance. It is the financial institutions that know us. So we don't publicize ourselves beyond what is necessary. And that is very deliberate to avoid moral hazard. We do not want farmers, smallholder farmers, and agribusinesses going to banks and knowing that they're borrowing money that has been borrowed from ABI Finance and think that there's a benevolent donor behind, which could result in moral hazard of them not paying. So we don't do top line advertisements. Our engagements are publicity, and our engagements are specific to the financial institution. So the people that need to know about us, we reach them, and that's who we lend. But that model has enabled us have money or financial sustainability to carry on for the last 15 years. So as we were morphing, we started as a trust, then became a company limited by guarantee, and now we're a company limited by shares. And that was specific in order to allow us bring in other shareholders. We have since grown beyond the initial shareholder, who was the Danish government or Danida or Royal Danish Embassy. And that's another thing that I would like to propose be adopted as well by this fraternity. Diversification, the age-old rule of diversification will be key. So while we have shareholders, we then had to broaden, and we've since brought on the Investment Fund for Developing Countries, another Danish development impact financier, and the European Union. The delegation of the European Union in Uganda has invested with us or in us. And we're currently doing resource mobilization or fundraising and bringing on board other shareholders. We're looking at 3 prospective shareholders. We currently have a balance sheet of $70 million. And are looking to bring on board another $30 million in the next year or this year, 2025. Then over the next 3 to 4 years, we want to grow that to $100 million. The idea is to have by $100 million and get to a $250 million balance sheet in order to try and meet the demand and have proper impact on the agribusiness sector in Uganda. So one key thing there that I bring about in the model is the structure. There are opportunities that can be taken advantage of or exploited or brought home in the way through relationships, through the track record, through making a case that there'll be need for longer term investments and get an endowment fund. Edgar spoke about something like that, and he was talking about reserves. With those reserves, you have the opportunity to invest them in, say, unit trusts or government bonds that can return some money to aid or facilitate your interventions. However, a question I've been thinking about and reflecting on in the various sectors, are there ways other than the unit trust and those kind of investments that you can commercialize your interventions? For instance, we do lend to smallholder farmers through the financial institutions borrowing from us, and as such we earn, and we underwrite a guarantee scheme where we allow for smallholder farmers who do not have collateral that would have prevented them from accessing the finance. We guarantee the smallholder farmers and agribusinesses, unbeknownst to them, in order to borrow the very money that we are making available to the financial institution. So in a sense, what we say to the banks is, go ahead. If everything that you look out for in an investable smallholder farmer or SME checks out, and the only thing that's letting them down is collateral, go ahead and lend to them. And should they default, we will pay up to 50%. And in some cases where we are taking particular interest, say refugees, women, youth, or underserved regions that have been hit by conflict, like in our case, that would be northern Uganda, and then others that have been underserved, like eastern Uganda, we can take that guarantee up to 70%, underwritten by our balance sheet. And so we pay claims. But those agribusinesses and smallholder farmers are none the wiser, and they do not know that they've been underwritten by us, because if they knew, they would deliberately default, which is why you see we don't do any top line advertisements. It is contractually written into our agreements with the financial institutions. They are not supposed to disclose to the smallholder farmers that they've been guaranteed, that without our guarantee, they wouldn't have accessed the amount of financing or even accessed any financing because of the absence of collateral. You find that many women, many youth do not own collateral from which they can pledge to the banks and earn money, and borrow money, or the SACCOs and the VSLAs. So sometimes they come through group lending models. Other times they don't even have that collateral. And they imagine, which is okay, that it's the benevolence of the bank and that the bank is, or the institutions are meeting their needs, which they are, but it is with our support. And even to be on that guarantee, the financial institutions have to pay to access that guarantee. And we find that it has still remained sustainable. Our portfolio at risk is less than 5%. The claims that we have paid have never gone over 2% of our portfolio. And it also demonstrates one thing which we keep telling the financial institutions, that you see, most of these smallholder farmers and agribusinesses are good for the credit. Behind them are honest men and women and youth who want to move to the next level. Aside from forces beyond their control, which they now have other adapting measures like insurance, like when they've lost the entire crop due to droughts or floods and that type of thing, they don't tend to deliberately go out of their way to default, especially when they know that they have everything at stake. So you find that the default rates have not been that exorbitant. At least they've not wiped out our fund, and we've remained sustainable. Diversification is a big thing. As you can see, we started with one shareholder. We've broadened to 3, are talking to 3 others. because even shareholders can change. They can want to exit, their priorities can change. For instance, right now, our Danish investors, especially the Danish government, is very much focused on green finance and adaptation. Should another party other than the Green Party come into power, as we saw with Trump, and priorities change, maybe it won't be green. And you could find them pulling out of companies that are invested in green and sustainable interventions. What would we do if Danida or the Danish government pulled out? Well, we would at least have the European Union, would have IFU, and would have these other three that we're currently talking to. So diversification remains a big thing. So those are the things. But as I was preparing for this engagement, I just kept thinking, in the health sector, how can that be replicated? And maybe it's a question I'm putting out there for consideration and discussion. To what extent do people go to the financial institutions, for instance, to borrow for health, to borrow for any other intervention that you're trying to do? And so what we're doing, part of our strategy is we're going to build our reserves, because part of our work, we also get grant financing. We've been beneficiaries of grant financing from these partners, the Danish government and all our shareholders, IFU and the European Union, because we also need to build capacities of the financial institutions. And in fact, behavioral change comes into play because we're dealing with attitudes around money and financial literacy and green literacy. But with the changing landscape, with grant financing dwindling, we're starting to put away part of our reserves and say 1% of our profit after tax is going to a reserve that will facilitate our technical assistance, because we're starting to look inward and be more self-sufficient. We're trying to be innovative and see how do we grow our own reserves and have the grant financing that will support the technical assistance that makes the smallholder farmers that much more investable, that makes the financial institutions understand how to lend to a smallholder farmer and an agribusiness. How do you do that credit risk management? How do you analyze that type of partner and all that? So that's what I can say about ABI Finance, and I hope that it provides some inspiration or some tips and guidance that can be borrowed by the fraternity. And as I said, I didn't quite have clear-cut answers as to its replication. I think for the agribusiness sector, it was easier to come to that because they were already
when you wait that election, you are coming to the project, you must know that you are going out of parliament. You must know that you are going home. This is that they voted
I don't know,
the MP out.
Could we mute our microphones? Sorry. So it's a case of looking at your sectors and seeing what aspects can be commercialized, can be traded. End of the day, we've got to make money. We've got to engage in economic activity that will make us financially viable, that will pay our way in some of these things. Edgar also talked about corporate governance. It's key. Corporate governance is key. Our impact, our monitoring, reporting, and verification is critical because the result that we sell is impact. The result that we sell is transformation, transformed lives. Farmers who have adapted to climate change and who are now borrowing to buy improved seed, to buy irrigation equipment, and makes them that much more resilient, and that they won't lose their crop should there be a drought or should there be floods. And so they're commercializing their livelihoods, they're commercializing their farms and enterprises. So now the question is, in your sectors, if there's a possibility of doing that. But as I said, it initially starts with engagements. All these were, the formation of ABI was down to relationships and people speaking. It is actually said it was, ABI was started in a pub with a napkin and a series of conversations that involved, at that time, somebody from our Ministry of Finance and Danida, and they formulated how it would start, and engagements started having. So at the core of these kind of things is relationships and trust. So I'll end it at that and hand back to you, and I'm happy to engage further and hear your views on what from our story can be adopted on your end. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mona, for the wonderful insights about ABI Trust. but also some practical examples of what could inform the thinking given the challenges that we are trying to address, to sort of think over during this webinar. Our colleagues, we had reserved some 20 minutes for Q&A. Unfortunately, we sort of overran the time. But I believe we've been asking questions. I've been following the chat, and there's been an ongoing conversation in the chat. With that, given the time that we left, I wanted to invite Professor Adebayo to sort of summarize the key takeaways from the session. Professor.
Okay. Thank you very much. I know that, yes, we have overrun, but we know that it's a very exciting conversation. Conversations have been going on, responses have been taking place, and so which is fine. As we wrap up this session, first, let me thank all the participants that have joined for this excellent session that we have had. Let me also thank the speakers for very insightful perspectives that they have provided. Let me also thank you, Emmanuel, for stepping into the process even in the last minute. So thanking everybody for having been part of this. I think that the webinar has generated different kinds of perspectives. It has raised issues, it has raised ideas, it has generated principles that we can ask. And I think it has been, for me, a very interesting kind of interrogation of this issue that we've always faced. And so, yes, it's not going to end here. The central theme and the central message for me is the SBC environment, the funding environment at a macro level and at a micro level has changed. And therefore, we have to change. As Soji said, this has been coming for a long time, and I think that we perhaps haven't paid specific attention to it, and so it caught us somewhat unawares, and we're like scrounging for ways of dealing with it. I think we have to get back into looking at how we need to do this a little bit much more effectively, because these things have changed, and then we need new ideas, new insights that have been identified. I remember that those days when I was in the UN, it was an input-based kind of modeling approach that we used. But clearly, and the resource-based management experts were telling us, use resource-based, use outcome-based, use impact-based, and stuff like that. But for a long time, we've stayed at that level. I think we really need to go back to embracing different kinds of models that will help us reposition our work in this particular area. So recognizing that the funding environment has changed necessitates for us a new approach for engaging in this particular area. That calls for what we are all talking about: new funding modalities, new funding processes, new models, new thinking, because that person that has that pot of money that is coming to give you to build your chairs and pay your salaries that had done in the past 40, 50 years may not likely be there tomorrow. The global landscape is changing. The geopolitical processes are changing. Social movements are generating everywhere. And so new ways of looking at our work, we just need to embrace that. And finally, for me, is the conversation has started, but it cannot end here, because we need to just continue as we sometimes say in Nigeria, this is not the end of discussion. It's the beginning of discussion, and we really need to continue to motivate ourselves towards these processes. As a society, one of the things that we'll be doing is ensuring that we continue further engagement at the national chapters level for this conversation to take place. We know global processes and the summits have been planned, and the defunding and the new structure is really, really affecting. I believe that we have to rethink where we are and to come up with new ways of redesigning some of the processes that will take us there, because the strategies that used to work before will not work.
Sur lesquels nous travaillions avant ne fonctionnent plus. Et il faut maintenant travailler avec les politiques d'extrême droite et de tensions géopolitiques, etc. Sur cette note, j'aimerais féliciter tous les orateurs, remercier tous les participants, organisateurs et nous espérons que nous pourrions continuer cette conversation à l'avenir. Est-ce qu'il est possible d'avoir un contact? Oui, vous allez continuer de vous engager et vous engager sur ces questions.
And then continue further conversation on it, because ultimately, for us to be truly decolonial, we have to be able to do things differently. So on that note, thank you very much for coming, and it's a great pleasure that you've enjoyed the session. Please keep us posted and join the society. Over and out. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Adebayo. Thank you, the panelists. Thank you, the participants. By way of ending, we'll share the recordings on the society's website. I will also summarize the key takeaways and share them on the website, as well as the various social media pages. But also, like Professor has mentioned, we'll not stop here. We'll continue to engage with other like-minded actors across the globe to find solutions to this challenge that is emerging. But also, just to encourage those that have not yet registered with the society to log on to the website and also participate in the various country chapter activities. With that, I'd like to wish everyone a good rest of the day, wherever you are. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye.